Imagine you're spending billions of dollars every year to stay close with your best friend, helping them, trusting them, only for them to suddenly treat you like a stranger. That's how many of America's closest allies feel in 2025. Sad, right? Countries like Ukraine and Canada are now paying a heavy price for staying loyal. Ukraine lost $13.5 billion in U.S. military help. Canada is hit with $17 billion in taxes on their goods. Friends don't do that, do they? These harsh actions under Trump's policies have shocked the world. Now, nations that once stood by America are slowly walking away, tired, hurt, and wondering if this friendship is worth it anymore. Number 8, Ukraine. Now, this part of the story is truly heartbreaking. Imagine being Ukraine right now in 2025. You're still in the middle of a brutal war with Russia, lives are being lost, cities are in ruins, and people are desperately holding on. For years, Ukraine looked up to America like a big brother, trusting it would always be there to help. But now that support has suddenly stopped, and the pain runs deep. Trump has frozen $13.5 billion in U.S. military aid, just like that, gone. He's also ended important intelligence sharing that once helped Ukraine stay one step ahead of Russian attacks. It felt like a punch to the stomach for Kiev. Ukraine was left scrambling, alone, in the middle of a war they never asked for, and the numbers are heartbreaking. Since Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, more than 9 million Ukrainians have been forced to flee their homes. The country's economy has collapsed by nearly 30%. Every drone, every radar, every satellite image matters. And now, they're being cut off. But it gets worse. Trump is pushing Ukraine to agree to a peace deal, one that many Ukrainians believe would let Russia win. He wants Ukraine to give up parts of its land. But a recent survey showed that 82% of Ukrainians completely reject that idea. They're not ready to give up their homes, their history, their country. On top of that, Trump has reportedly kept Ukraine out of high-level NATO talk. Imagine how that must feel, being shut out of the very room where your future is being discussed. Still, Ukraine is not giving up. They're now making more weapons at home, signing a $2.88 billion deal with European defense companies. They're building new friendships in Asia and the Middle East. They've learned the hard way that talk means nothing without action. In the words of one Ukrainian official, we've stopped trusting promises. Real friends show up. They don't disappear. And sadly, with Trump's actions, the U.S. is starting to look less like a true friend and more like someone who walked away when it mattered most. Number 7, Taiwan. This story about Taiwan in 2025 is filled with shock, frustration, and deep sadness. For years, Taiwan and the United States had a careful, complicated relationship. America offered support, but always tried not to make China too angry. It was like a delicate dance. But now, that dance feels more like a painful dodgeball game, and the U.S. just threw the first hit. Under Trump's second term, the U.S. slapped a huge 32% tax tariff on many Taiwanese products, not on computer chips, but on other key items like electronics, machines, and car parts. The reason? Trump says Taiwan is too powerful in the chip market and wants more of those chips made in America. To understand how serious that is, one Taiwanese company, TSMC, makes over half of the world's computer chips, and chips make up almost 40% of Taiwan's total exports. The US is Taiwan's second biggest customer. So this tax is a big deal, a very painful one. Taiwanese companies have already lost over $8 billion in just 6 months. But the hurt doesn't stop there. Trump also wants Taiwan to pay more for American weapons like Patriot missiles and F-16 fighter jets, even though Taiwan already spent over $10 billion on them. People in Taiwan were so upset, thousands protested in the streets of Taipei. They say America is treating them like they owe protection money, not like real allies. Feeling betrayed, Taiwan is now trying to survive without depending so much on the US. They've made a trade deal with Japan and are talking to Europe too. Militarily, they're teaming up with Australia and the Philippines. The message is loud and clear. Taiwan is done waiting for uncertain promises. Yes, America still says they stand with Taiwan, but now it feels more like love with conditions. And Taiwan has learned to stay safe, they need more than one friend they can count on. Number 6, South Korea. This story about South Korea in 2025 is full of sadness, shock, and a deep feeling of betrayal. For over 70 years, South Korea and the United States have stood together like close friends, ever since the Korean War. But now, that friendship feels one-sided. It's like your best friend always borrows your car but never puts in any gas. You start to feel used. The big problem? Trump keeps demanding that South Korea pay much more money to support U.S. troops who are still stationed there, around 28,500 of them. He wants South Korea to pay up to $5 billion every year. That's almost 3 times more than before. South Korean leaders are calling it extortion, and many people in the country are angry. A recent Gallup poll showed that 74% of South Koreans now think it's time to stop depending so much on the U.S. and build their own defense instead. So the government is taking action. In 2025, South Korea announced its biggest military budget ever, raising it to 3% of the country's economy. They're building their own fighter jets, missile defense systems, and powerful new tanks. They want to protect themselves just in case the U.S. walks away. And things feel even worse because of Trump's careless talk. He said he might pull U.S. troops out if South Korea doesn't pay more. That kind of threat feels scary, especially with North Korea testing more missiles and bragging about its nuclear weapons. Instead of waiting for more surprises from Trump, South Korea is now turning to other friends. They're doing military exercises with Japan, Australia, and even Vietnam. They also made a $12 billion trade deal with the European Union, just in case U.S. trade becomes a problem too. People in Seoul feel heartbroken. They say real allies don't act like bullies or greedy landlords. And if the U.S. keeps treating South Korea like a tenant instead of a friend, don't be shocked if South Korea starts looking for a new home. Number 5, Japan. Japan has always been one of America's strongest friends in the Pacific, like a steady rock. But in 2025, even that rock is starting to crack. For over 60 years, since the 1960 treaty, Japan and the U.S. stood side by side, protecting each other and sharing defense duties. But now things are changing fast and not in a good way. What's the problem? Former President Trump is back and demanding that Japan pay much more for defense, asking for 3.5% of its GDP. That's more than double what Japan pays now. And remember, Japan already spends about $50 billion each year on defense, especially because of threats from China and North Korea. But now Trump is pushing hard, and Japan is feeling the pressure. The Japanese government and the people are frustrated and sad. A 2025 survey by NHK showed that more than 62% of Japanese people think Japan should stop relying so much on U.S. protection and focus on its own defense. That's a big shift in public feeling. So, Japan is taking matters into its own hands. It just finished building its first next-generation fighter jet, all made in Japan, costing over $20 billion. That's a clear message. We can protect ourselves. At the same time, Japan is making new friends. It's working more closely with Australia, India, and the United Kingdom through the Quad Alliance. They're also teaming up on military projects and trade deals outside of U.S. control. But that's not all. Trump also talked about putting new taxes on Japanese cars, like Toyota and Honda. These cars are super important to Japan's economy, making up almost 12% of exports. Because of Trump's threats, Japanese car sales in the U.S. dropped 9% this year. Now, Japan is turning to Europe and Southeast Asia for new markets. People in Japan are hurt. They're saying loud and clear, true friends don't give threats, they give support. If the U.S. wants to stay close to Japan, it might need to stop acting like a bully and start acting like a real ally again. Number 4, Poland. Something very unexpected is happening. Poland, once seen as America's favorite student in NATO, is quietly stepping away. For many years, Poland was proud to be one of the most pro-American countries in Europe. They were so loyal that they even agreed to name a military base Fort Trump. That's how close they were. But now, in 2025, things feel different. The friendship is fading. Former President Trump is demanding that NATO countries spend 5% of their GDP on defense. That's more than double the 2% they all agreed on years ago. Poland is already spending nearly 4%, one of the highest amounts in NATO. They even bought $14 billion worth of U.S. tanks and fighter jets. And still, Trump said it wasn't enough. That hurt. Polish leaders are frustrated. They've started asking, is this really friendship or is this just pressure and threats? And it's not just the politicians who feel that way, the people do too. A recent survey showed that 58% of Poles now want to build a stronger European defense, even if it means stepping a little further away from the U.S. Then came even more worry, Trump saying he might pull U.S. troops out of Europe if countries don't meet his demands. That shook Poland's trust. The country that once cheered the loudest for America is now full of doubt and sadness. So Poland is making new moves. They're teaming up more with Germany, France, and nearby countries, putting money into European defense systems like Permanent Structured Cooperation and the Sky Shield. They're also building new trade ties with countries like Turkey, Israel, and the Czech Republic. And because of Trump's threats of tariffs, Polish exports to the US dropped by 11%. Now, they're turning to Asia and the Middle East for trade. Poland used to be America's biggest supporter in Europe, but in 2025, they're wondering, what's the point of being the favorite if the rules keep changing and the friendship feels one-sided? Number 3, Canada. The quiet, kind neighbor everyone loves. The country known for maple syrup, peace, and always being ready to help. But in 2025, something has changed. The warm friendship between the US and Canada is starting to freeze, and not because of the snow. Why? It all began with Trump's tough trade rules. He added new taxes on Canadian wood, steel, and dairy. These products used to bring Canada about $17 billion from US sales every year, but now, that number is falling fast. Cross-border trade has dropped by 12% since Trump's second term began. That's not just business, that's trust-breaking. But what hurt even more was one shocking comment. Trump casually said Canada would be better off as the 51st state. That felt like a slap in the face. Imagine your neighbor saying, "Hey, nice house. I think I'll just take it." Canadians didn't laugh. They were angry and deeply offended. A poll from Angus Rees showed that 76% of Canadians now think the US is not a trustworthy partner. That's the highest level of mistrust in over 40 years. It's sad, it's shocking. A bond that took decades to build is cracking. Because of this, Canada is now thinking twice about its deals with America. They're reconsidering a huge $19 billion fighter jet contract with the US and might buy from Europe instead, maybe from France or Germany. Canada's also working more closely with its European allies and focusing on projects that don't give the US all the power. Even in trade, Canada's making new friends, sealing a $6 billion deal with the UK and growing connections with Japan, South Korea, and the EU. For years, the US and Canada shared the world's longest open border, 5,525 miles of peace. But now, Canada's learning a hard lesson. Being a good neighbor doesn't mean staying silent when you're treated unfairly. Even the nicest neighbor might need to build a little fence. Number 2, France, the country we think of when we hear words like wine, cheese, love, and beauty. But in 2025, France is not just about romance and food. It's about standing up and walking away from something that no longer feels fair. And sadly, that something is its long friendship with the United States. For many years, France and America raised glasses together, shared smiles, and stood side by side. But now, things are changing. Why? Because of Trump. His words about NATO being a burden and his friendliness toward Russia shocked many in Europe, especially French President Emmanuel Macron. Macron heard the message loud and clear. It's time for France to stop depending on the US. That's why France raised its military budget to 60 billion euros in 2025. That's a big jump. Macron wants Europe to protect itself without needing help from America. Trump's demand that NATO countries spend 5% of their GDP on defense, when France already gives 2.3%, felt like too much. But it's not just about tanks and troops, it's also about money and respect. Trump added taxes to French wine, cheese, and luxury items. That hurt. About $4.7 billion in French exports were affected. French farmers and businesses were left frustrated and angry. In response, France didn't stay quiet. They pushed for new taxes on big American companies like Google and Amazon. The message? France won't be pushed around. Now, France is building stronger bonds with Germany, Italy, and Spain. They're doing military drills together and making defense tools as a team. On the trade side, France is turning toward India and China, signing deals worth billions and slowly stepping away from US markets. In the end, France wants friendship, not control, not threats, not games. And in 2025, Paris is finally saying, we're done playing by America's rules. Number 1, Germany, the strong heart of Europe's economy, and now the loudest voice saying we need space from the US. This isn't just a small argument, it's a big, serious change. Germany isn't only rethinking its friendship with America, it's leading Europe to stand on its own. And Trump's tough ways pushed them there. It began when Trump demanded NATO countries spend 5% of their GDP on defense, calling Germany a freeloader. But Germany, already spending a lot, 72 billion euros in 2025, up from 53 billion in 2022, refused to be told what to do. Instead, Germany decided to work with France, Spain, and Poland to build a strong European defense team, sometimes called a European NATO. They want to protect themselves without relying on the US. But the biggest hurt came from Trump's sudden pullout from peace talks in Ukraine and his talk about lifting sanctions on Russia. Germany sees this as a betrayal. With over 1.2 million Ukrainian refugees now living in Germany, keeping Ukraine safe isn't a choice, it's a must. Trump's friendliness toward Russia made Germany lose trust. On top of that, Trump's new taxes on German cars hit hard. Cars make up 18% of Germany's exports to the US, about $30 billion every year. Because of this, German car makers like BMW and Mercedes have seen a 10% drop in US sales and are now trying to sell more in Asia and Latin America instead. To show how serious they are, Chancellor Olaf Scholz just signed a huge €10 billion deal with France and Italy to build defense weapons together. This is one of the biggest military deals in Europe's history and is meant to rely less on American arms. The message from Germany is loud and clear. Europe is ready to stand alone. If Trump thought he could push Germany around, he was wrong. Germany has its own plans, and they don't include being America's sidekick anymore.